Nobel Prize speech with the words "Once upon a time." Well, that's storytelling, right, baby?
Atelier program, which was for artists to collaborate with writers, her writers, and it was brilliant. And I did one performance that was involved. Got to meet her and talk to her.
God,
Amazing.
amazing, amazing. Oh, okay. Hey, Jessica. Hey, how are you? Great to see you.
Always.
I always say this is the biggest design flaw because the toilet door and the stage door.
Oh no, how funny. Although it's not bad knowing that's there, just
Right,
in case
yes.
I all of a sudden have to pee.
Yeah, then I'll vamp.
Yeah.
I'll tell a story about Egyptology or something.
Okay, good, exactly.
Okay, so just hang here and
Okay, and then you'll.
mic on.
Yes.
Yes, my mic is on.
Let me see. Mine is too, because the green light is on.
Green light is on.
Yeah.
Green light is on. Great.
Should I put it back there? That's a good idea. No, I'll just put it here.
In your pocket. Either way.
Okay.
Just tuck your wires in.
Love you. Thank you for having me. Oh my God, it's like such so fun. It feels, it feels really.
Hi, everyone. Good evening. Welcome to the Center for Fiction. My name is Melanie McNair. I'm the Senior Director of Public Programming here. How many of you are visiting us for the first time this evening? Oh my goodness, please come back all the time. If you don't know, the Center for Fiction is a 200-year-old cultural nonprofit whose mission is to encourage people to read and value fiction and to support and celebrate its creation and enjoyment. And we do this through public events like this one. I'll get to that because, it's not fiction. Reading groups and writing workshops, all offering vibrant, accessible, and inclusive programs that welcome a wide community to experience the joy of story. Our Kids Read program offers immersive reading experiences for children, and we support early career writers with our First Novel Prize and our Emerging Writers Fellowship. So please visit our site and sign up for our mailing list and follow us on social media. Our fall season, we've got 2 more events before we break for a little bit, but our fall season is a real star-studded extravaganza, so don't miss out on anything. And for example, on Monday, September 23rd, we will welcome David Adjemi, Tony-winning playwright of Stereophonic here. A couple of logistics for tonight. We will have an audience Q&A, so raise your hand if you have a question and wait for one of our fabulous interns to bring a microphone to you, because we have a number of people watching on the live stream tonight and they can hear your question as well. Welcome to all of you on the live stream. You can type your question in the chat at any time and we'll read one of those before we break for song. Ricky was kind enough to pre-sign copies of Seeing Through, and we'll be doing a personalization line after the event, just on the other side of this wall. Tonight's event, so I told you I was going to get to it. Tonight's event is part of our Storyteller Arts series, where we celebrate writers whose work spans from the page to the performing arts. And it's now my absolute pleasure to introduce you to Anthony Roth Costanzo, who's going to introduce our good friend, Ricky.
Hey, everybody. I'm Anthony. I'm so excited to be here at the Center for Fiction, and I'm so excited to be here with Ricky Ian Gordon, presenting this beautiful new book, which is called Seeing Through, A Chronicle of Sex, Drugs, and Opera, which it very much is. I'm Anthony. I'm Anthony. I am an opera singer, a countertenor. I'm also the general director and president of Opera Philadelphia. So thank you. Woo! Thank you. But I wear many hats, and the best part of my past few weeks has been taking them all off to read Ricky's book. And I hope that you all get to do that. Ricky, of course, needs no introduction, but for the uninitiated, if there are any of you here, he is an award-winning, celebrated, and hugely successful composer, poet, and author. And Ricky's music has been performed and recorded by luminaries like Audra McDonald, Dawn Upshaw, Judy Collins, Kelly O'Hara, Lorraine Hunt Lieberson, and Kristen Chenoweth, to name very few. And his oeuvre is so substantial, I can't tell you all about them, but the brilliant operatic works that you may know, like Grapes of Wrath, 27, Intimate Apparel, they're things that continue to resonate in our minds. So please welcome Ricky. Ricky thought, and I can't disagree, that the best way to start would be with a little bit of music first. So this is our first time performing together, which is very exciting. So we're going to give you a little souvenir. Just a rainy day or two in a windy tower. That was all I had of you, saving half an hour, marred by greeting passing groups in a cinder walk near some naked blackberry hoops dim with purple chalk. I remember 3 or 4 things you said in spite, and an ugly coat you wore, plaided black and white. Just a rainy day or two, and a bitter word. Why do I remember you as a singing bird? Just a rainy day or two in a windy tower. That was all I asked of you, saving half an hour. Well, first of all, why don't you tell us about that song?
That song is, it's called Souvenir, and it's a poem by Edna St. Vincent Millay. And I thought it would be a good thing to start with because there's a big thing in the book about how when I was a little boy, my sister Susan would put me to sleep by reading Edna St. Vincent Millay to me. And so by the time I became a composer, I knew many of her poems by heart. I also had a record of her saying her poems that Susan also gave me. So and this is a very early song. It's like 1982. I was only 3.
And I was born in 82.
You were?
Yeah.
Oh my God, Anthony.
So, so you say in the book, if you asked me what for me was the most charged and powerful word in the English language, I would answer without delay, opera.
Yes.
Why?
Because and this is also in the book, but when I was 8, I went to my friend Peter's piano lesson, and I pulled a book off the shelf, and it was called The Victor Book of Opera. And I really kid you not, it was like there was light and smoke behind that book. That's what it felt like. And I became so obsessed with this book that by the time it was over, Peter's lesson was over, Mrs. Fox gave me the book. And I don't really know what happened that day, but my entire life changed. I started going, Peter and I got him into opera. We started going every Saturday and Sunday. We would wait online with our friend Arthur as well, and we would get standing room tickets and see everything at the Met. In those days, everything was sold out, and it was like Birgit Nilsson and Franco Corelli and Leontine Price. And so, and I don't know, just it's like the power of that word. That's all I really want to do with my life.
I love that. And, it all came from a book, right? It all came from this book.
Yes.
And now you've written your own book on opera. Now, obviously, it's very different than that book you pulled off the shelf.
Oh, my God.
But I'm wondering what prompted you to write a book, and what was the process like for you?
Well, Kevin and I went upstate for the quarantine because I was rehearsing Intimate Apparel at Lincoln Center Theater, and it was March 12th, and we were going to open on March 23rd. It was postponed. My other opera, Garden of the Finzi Continis, was postponed. Pretty much all my work was postponed. So we grabbed our little dog, Lucy, and we went upstate thinking we'd be back in the city a month later, and we weren't. And I just thought, I need to do something else. Like, I was almost angry at music. So I talked to my friend Marie Howe, a poet, and I said, I want to start a writing group. I want to see what that would be like to have the imperative to write and have people to bring it to every week. So it was Marie Howe, Donna Massini, Victoria Riddell, Nick Flynn, Michael Klein. Now I'm like, but we had this Richard McCann, Martin Moran. Wow. We had this incredible writing group, and we would read to each other. Victoria Riddell, did I say that? And we would, we timed it, 15 minutes, and you had your slot. And they would bring like poems, and the second I started writing, I would have like 30 pages of prose. It was like some door opened in me. And really what happened was, then it was February 1st of 2020, and my horoscope, I always read Susan Miller Astrology Zone, and my horoscope was like, this month is unbelievable, so you have to do something. So on a lark, I sent a couple of chapters to Jonathan Galassi at FSG. I like that publisher. I love Jonathan. And I had met him because I had set Frank Bedart's poem, Ellen West, to music and turned it into an opera. And Frank won the Pulitzer, and I sat next to Jonathan at the Pulitzer dinner. So I sent him these 2 chapters, and he wrote back, and he goes, there's something here, and if I were you, I would just keep going. Don't look back. Let it find its shape. And I would like to send you a book we just published. And it was John Giorno's autobiography. Mm. And 2 weeks later, I wrote to Jonathan to tell him what I thought of that book. And I sent him 2 more chapters. And then he wrote me pretty quickly and said, I want to do this book with you. Call me in the morning, let's talk. And it was spelled T-A-W-K. And do you have a literary agent? So the next morning, my theatrical agent, it was Beth Blickers, got me Laurie Liss, this fantastic literary agent, and the rest is history. But I mean, I never did anything like this before. I handed Jonathan 800 single-spaced pages. That was my memoir, and he was cut it in half, and then I shall look at it.
And now we have it.
Yes.
And I was really struck myself because, I began on Broadway as a musical theater kid.
I didn't even know that.
Yeah, that's where it all started for me. And so I feel like my theatrical instincts are there, and then now they're all invested in opera. And I feel like there's this dialectic in the book between musical theater and opera, and sort of being caught in the crosshairs, gravitating toward one, getting frustrated with that, and going to the other. Can you talk a little bit about the pull in those two directions?
I mean, when I first started writing, it was Stephen Sondheim was writing for the musical theater. I knew that people like John Carlo Menotti wrote like The Consul and did it on Broadway. And I think that a lot of us thought that Stephen Sondheim was an open door to a new kind of musical sophistication on Broadway. But it was more an aberration, is the absolute truth. Which is not to say if you love all the musicals on Broadway now, that's great, but they aren't what I do. And when I finally wrote a musical of My Life with Albertine, which was based on Proust with Richard Nelson, I could just tell by the response to it, and that was 2003. I was like, I'm in the wrong place, and I need to find where my work will be heard and where I can write what I write. And I sent all these opera companies recordings of my music, and it was like, it worked. It worked. I mean, Houston Grand Opera, I got a commission from them. I got a commission to write Grapes of Wrath. So it was meant to be, and I love where I am. And someday I might do something for the musical theater again, but it will be on my own terms, which, may be loathed by the press.
Well, I'm really curious now that you've landed in this operatic world, and before we dive into what is all behind that personally, what do you feel like opera is missing today?
What an interesting question. The truth is, Anthony, it's not missing a lot for me when I'm in it. Like for me, for example, if you're a composer, you spend these years alone, and then when it's over, you've created a community, and everyone's in that room because you were by yourself. You were either working with your libretto, I see Michael Corey on the corner, and so it's very exciting. The only thing, if you said, what do you think needs to happen in the opera world besides for that all of my pieces get done at the Met? I would say that I do think, though I have been lucky to work with great singing actors, I don't think enough is taught to singers about living in their bodies and acting as interpretation. I think that needs to improve.
There's a lot of focus on the voice, and sometimes we lose track of the fact that that's only one vehicle.
Yes.
I want to focus in on one opera which you talk about in the book and that I've also done, so I'm particularly interested in your perspective, and that's Benjamin Britten's Death in Venice. And I'm just going to open this discussion by saying it's a very layered piece. Obviously, there's the Thomas Mann story, which has its own implications, and then Britten's, his personal life was very much in the way he wrote it. But my layer of it is I remember doing a production of it in Madrid at the Teatro Real, and the countertenor sings the voice of Apollo. And they wanted this to be unseen and just coming down from the heavens. So they put me in this cage in the 5th balcony. And it was very fun, but there was a scene in it when all of the dancers, these wonderful dancers, all boys, beautiful boys, all came on completely naked. And of course, in rehearsal, we never did that. But when we got to the stage part, I thought, this is great. Now I'm going to get to see all these people naked. And as it turned out, the cage that I was in it didn't allow me to see.
Oh, no.
And I was very upset by that and had my own kind of Aschenbachian crisis in the cage. And my solution to it was, they had given me a monitor with the conductor on it because I couldn't see the conductor, I was too far away. And so, he would cue me into the monitor and everything, but I discovered that if I changed the channel on the monitor...
That's great.
So I was a little off with the music, but this is all to say, what do you feel Britten brought to Thomas Mann's story that wasn't there? And what do you think that opera is about for you and for everyone else? I quote a line from the libretto in my book, and the line is,
there is indeed in every artist a wanton and treacherous proneness to side with beauty. And that is, to me, what that book is about. It's about when that happens to you. I am and have always been prone to obsession. And when I was, because of drugs, because of alcohol, whatever fed that flame, I would go off in these directions. I mean, I really identified with Aschenbach when I first read that book. And what I feel like Benjamin Britten found in that opera was the exact murky inner life of the story. I feel like he captures the sort of slightly dirty water of the Venetian lagoon. I feel he captures the atmosphere of menace. I feel he captures the heartbreak and the isolation of Aschenbach. I just think it's a work of genius. I came home from college to see the premiere at the Met.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned your addiction, and you talk about that in the book. And it's in certain instances, it's kind of juxtaposed with love. But then you also talk about love being its own addiction in the book. And I'm curious if you can talk to us a little bit about how you learned to titrate pleasure and bliss with a kind of sustainable reality.
What does that word mean?
Titrate.
I never
Isn't
heard that
the
word.
right, you know, where you like you figure out how much of one thing you need and how much of the other. Balance, yeah.
Oh, okay, no, I never learned it. I didn't. I wish I could say I did. I mean, the only thing now that I'm sober is there's just a lot of time on my hands, you know, because there used to be a lot of that was occupied. So now there's nothing to do but write and, you know, live my life. Love Kevin, watch TV at night, Survivor. So there is balance for me is just that I'm happiest when I'm doing my work and miserable when I'm not.
I think that work becomes its own kind of addiction as well, but it is a very productive one, which is great.
Yes.
You know, in the book, there's a lot of moving passages about Jeffrey, your partner who died of AIDS. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about how that whole experience changed you.
It really changed me. I mean, I really do think of my life as before Jeffrey and after Jeffrey, only because when you get sober, like at least for me, it was I was by nature a hedonist, and I wasn't thinking about serving. I wasn't thinking about helping others. And when Jeffrey and I went on our very first date, which was interestingly right after I had just seen Paul Rudnick's play Jeffrey. And it was like, that was Thursday night with Mary Gettle. I went with her. And then Sunday night was my first date with Jeffrey. And we were sitting at this restaurant on 72nd Street, Sambuca. And at one point he leaned across the table and he really, like a shadow, darkened his face. And he said, I have to tell you something. I'm HIV positive, which, you know, at the time meant I'm gonna die. And I got a thought, which is not the kind of thought I ever would have gotten. And the thought was, I'm gonna love him right out of the world. That's what I'm gonna do. And to think such a thing, to think anything selfless, to suddenly feel I was useful, and it was, so that's what happened. I mean, you'll know if you read the book. I mean, I wrote him an opera of the Tibetan Book of the Dead because he wanted to die as a Buddhist and he wanted me to learn the teachings. So the way I learned the teachings was I set them to music. While Jeffrey was in his bed, I set those teachings to music, and then the opera premiered at Houston Grand Opera. Jeffrey came for the world premiere, got sick. We had to send him home. It was horrifying. But then 2 weeks later, we did it in Philadelphia. He was able to come. He saw the opera. He was wearing his little blue dust mask. The cast met him. Everybody cried. At the end, I introduced him as my muse, and he was dead within the month.
I don't know if you have a book to read.
Yes, I do.
Excerpts, but I'd love you to read us a little piece about Jeffrey.
Yes, I will. Hold on.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so I have to do this. I'm set up.
You got it.
Okay, you ready?
Perfect. Yeah.
So this is 1996. One day, about 3 weeks before he died, the doctor in the hospital decided he needed some of Jeffrey's bone marrow. And while I held Jeffrey, he shoved what looked like an ice pick into Jeffrey's hip bone, which made him shake and scream. The doctor did it twice. What they could possibly have found out from that torture that would have made him live any longer, I will never know. They might as well have pulled out his fingernails with pliers. My sister Sheila came to New York from Florida to help me get Jeffrey home from the hospital. She had brought him a beautiful watercolor of a house in a beatific setting with all kinds of lovely greenery and flowers. And she said, "Jeffrey, I think this is where you are going." She asked him how he was doing, and he said, "Sheila, I am ready to call it a life." In fact, he had just won the lottery for the experimental cocktail that ended up being really effective for treating the virus and extending lives. But by then, he was so sick, so thin, so far gone, he assumed, and I guess I concurred, that a whole new drug regime would just kill him quicker. We took him home early in the morning. Sheila called a cab and had it waiting in front of the hospital. It had just rained, but now the sun was out, making everything, the grass, the trees, the forsythia, and the wisteria in Central Park across the street glisten, and a mist rising off the ground made the park look like Valhalla. We wheeled Jeffrey's wheelchair outside and down the ramp. Jeffrey looked around at everything as if he were saying goodbye to the world, craning his head left and right like an egret, tears filling his eyes. It is hard for me to think about that moment without becoming hysterical. This baby bird craning its neck moments before the talons of a raptor haul it off and tear it away. It is one of the most indelible images etched in my mind. It smelled as if the world had been baptized. For the last few weeks, there was a problem with his insurance, so every day I would have to go to the pharmacy where they would give me only a one-day supply. By this point, I started sleeping on the couch in the living room because there was a pretty loud pump sending supplementary nutrition through his veins at night, and it sounded like a chugging train engine to me. One night, he called me into our room. His right ear was really hurting him, and he was in enormous distress and agitated. He asked if we could go to the doctor the next day. I got on top of him, and I looked into his eyes and said, "Jeffrey, there are no more doctor's visits, no more hospitals." He was silent for a few seconds. He knew immediately what I was saying. He asked, almost with relief in his eyes, "Do you mean my body is failing?" And I said, "Yes. The doctor told me to just keep you comfortable and out of pain." I gave him a Vicodin. The next morning, he was calling friends and relatives to tell them the news with the same glee you might have upon getting accepted into Yale. "I'm dying," he screamed, as if it were a good thing. He loved at least knowing once and for all the direction everything was going in. He was terribly excited to eat whatever he wanted the next morning after the diet of brown rice, fish, and greens, and requested a cinnamon roll from Cinnabon and coffee. The next day, I had to go to the east side to pick up fentanyl patches from one of the doctors, and Jeffrey asked me if I would consider going down to Little Italy and picking up his favorite food, chicken parmesan and pasta from Angelo's on Mulberry Street, for what he thought would be his last meal. I did, but when I got home, I discovered they had left out his favorite thing of all, the salad dressing. I cried in a state of utter exasperation, and he made me call the restaurant, demanding they come uptown and deliver the salad dressing, grabbing the phone out of my hands, tearfully explaining the circumstances. "This is my last meal." But they wouldn't. It was too far uptown. His mother did the best she could with the dressing, but his disappointment was deep, and he sulked the rest of the day while I mumbled about how many miles I had traveled on this godforsaken day for absolutely nothing.
Wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you.
You know, I had my own, I had an acting teacher who died of AIDS, so I feel connected to it, and I feel connected to that crisis. But I also am keenly aware of how the younger generation doesn't have that direct connection. And I'm curious if you thought about that at all as you put this down. You know, it's so interesting, the process of writing a book, when you feel that you are memorializing your life in some way and keeping it there. Did you think about how it might inform or touch the next generation?
I wouldn't know. The truth is, if I were honest about the way I wrote this book, I would write at the top of a page a word like AIDS, and then I would just write until I had written myself out. And in every chapter or section sort of has its own structure. Like you notice in the AIDS chapter, it's snapshot 1, snapshot 2, right? And of course, at the end, in the last page of the book, when I say, might it be useful to someone reading this book, the messy, disgusting, heartbreaking, sometimes funny, sometimes this life of an artist on the planet. You know what I mean? That is what my book could possibly show. And AIDS for me was the dead center of my life. So it was, you basically lost an entire community, and then for me, and then I lost Jeffrey, and then for 5 years, I just cried. It was like, and it was no longer grief for Jeffrey, it was just grief for everything. It just was, it was so overwhelming, you know.
And how did that grief make it into your music?
Well, I think, you know, I've been listening to a lot of Mahler. And, you know, Mahler was obsessed with death, like he was born obsessed with death. And I was thinking, I don't know why. In the same way, like Stanley Kunitz, the great American poet, his topic was that his father, while his mother was pregnant with him, shot himself in the head in a public park with a rifle, and Stanley Kunitz never met him. But the empty chair of this father he never met was his topic. I feel like I don't understand why, but grief has always been my topic. I even wrote in a poem about Jeffrey after I died, he was a part of my story before I ever met him.
It's so interesting, and it's also fascinating to know that that's the center of your imagination, because you appear to those of us who know you so full of life, so positive, so happy, and yet you have, as we learn in the book, lost so many people, not only Jeffrey to AIDS, but people, there's lots of cancer that comes into your life and takes people away from you. So how do you feel like you've maintained your sense of positivity, or is it all a facade?
Antidepressants. No, I would say, you know, the fortunate thing about being an artist, a composer, is I have a container. I get to build containers for my grief. And if you look at after Jeffrey died, I mean, I wrote Orpheus and Eurydice, Green Sneakers, The Grapes of Wrath. Almost everything I've written, in a way, houses a kind of grief, a kind of loss. Now, 27 is a very fun comic opera, but really, in the end, Alice loses Gertrude, and it's her loss of Gertrude that is the impetus for the opera to start. So I just feel, Anthony, like that's what we get to do. I don't even know, I really don't know if I'd be alive if I didn't have music to house the hurt. And words, I love words.
Talk to us about the words you had written before the book, for your music, for other things, and how that kind of writing is distinct from the writing you did with the book.
Well, I was always, even when I was a little boy, I would write poems, but I use that word loosely because I really do feel like I know great poets, and sometimes I just, like, even in my writing group, when I would bring a poem, I would be so embarrassed. But I don't know, I got a book contract, what can I say? But so, and there were gonna be poems between chapters, like sorbet between, but then, the book was longer than Remembrance of Things Past. So, but I started writing out of necessity. Sometimes there's something that has to be said, and I can't find it. Orpheus and Eurydice, I wrote the text because I needed to tell my story through that myth, the story of Geoffrey and I. Eurydice gets a mysterious virus that robs her from Orpheus incrementally. Green Sneakers, I was in Utah, and we were doing the Grapes of Wrath the second time. It opened in Minnesota, and the second production was in Utah. One morning, and I had gotten this commission from Bravo Vail Valley Music Festival for a 10-minute string quartet. 10 minutes, that just does not happen to me. So I was meditating. I would meditate every morning for an hour, and I was meditating. I saw this whole piece in my head, Green Sneakers. I had written this whole cycle of poems right after Geoffrey died, and as Stanley Kunitz would say, locked them in my deepest cabinet. But that morning they came thumping, and I was like, Green Sneakers, that's what I'm gonna write. I knew I had the Miami String Quartet, and I had a baritone who was in Grapes of Wrath, Jesse Blumberg. I sent him the poems, and I said, do you think you could sing these words? And he was very dear and said, I'd be honored. And that was how that came about. So it's music I could write every day. Words come in explosions and periodically, except for this book that was one like a hydrogen bomb.
Well, on that, I want to hear another excerpt of the, I want to inhale some hydrogen. If you can read us a little bit about maybe the Laura Nero.
Yes, so you guys, there's a lot of chapters in this book on like Joni Mitchell, Laura Nero, Stephen Sondheim. I think it's one of the fun things about the book, and it's also honest, because sometimes things didn't go so well with those people. The Sondheim chapter, if you read In Town and Country, that is really like a fourth of the actual story. It's really a nightmare, but it ends a good ending. So this is a little scene. I'm writing here about Laura Nero when she did her album New York Tenderberry, which I felt was a gigantic step forward for her. I thought New York Tenderberry was and she was, her interiority made the new style of her writing masterful. And Sheila and Patrick are my sister and brother-in-law. Patrick is a fake name. It is 1969, and I am 13. I want to tell you about a scene and a time I go back to when I hear New York Tenderberry. Sheila and Patrick were living in Rockville Center with a couple named Susan and Kenny Wilson and their little boy, Kenny Jr. I loved that house. I loved being there beyond anywhere I had ever been. For one thing, there was no one on earth I wanted to be with more than Sheila and Patrick. So anyone who was there where they were, I loved too. Kenny kept snakes, so he had 2 huge pythons that fascinated me, especially when you got to see one stalk, attack, and eat an unknowing rabbit. The atmosphere in this house was, you were somewhere you could say or do anything, and it wouldn't matter. The furniture was welcoming like a warm lap. The pictures on the walls all felt mystical, like mandalas. And everywhere, there were colorful fabrics draped over everything that could easily be turned into a sari, a sarong, or a blanket for warmth. I guess it was a little like a commune. It was a shame-free zone. It was the time of free love and dried flowers and incense, and anything can happen. It was a happy time for Sheila. She and Patrick loved living there. Sheila bought a Nikon camera and documented their lives in beautiful photographs, glittering with amber light. She hung her jewelry, her earrings, her necklaces from the mirrors with complete trust that nothing like a robbery could ever happen there in such a beatific atmosphere. It might have been the happiest they ever were when they were together, so much so that when they broke up, it punctured the membrane that kept Sheila tethered to the world, and for at least a decade, she was deranged with sadness. One night I was at the Wilson house. Sheila and Patrick went to a party. I don't remember why I didn't go with them. Maybe I wasn't invited. But I stayed home with Kenny and we smoked really strong hash and got crazy ass high. We were tripping out on New York Tenderberry. I was hearing everything, including the arrangements, the brass, the chimes, the breaths, and the piano in a whole new way, as if it were live in the room. When you are young like that, you can give yourself over to music, like being underwater, because you are always looking for a way out of your body, out of your broken heart, your rattled mind. And music is the escape hatch. Only as you grow older do you develop all the controls you need to keep everything out, including beauty, including love. Kenny, who, with his wavy shoulder-length golden hair and his beard and mustache, which were slightly darker but no less luxurious, looked like a Viking or the soul of Ireland, fell asleep on the floor. I was overstimulated in that way you get when you are so high you can stare at the corner of a room for hours completely amazed, saying, wow, every 10 seconds. Well, here I was in a room on a chair listening to Laura Nyro with Kenny asleep on the floor facing the ceiling, and I felt as though I could stare at him, examine him brazenly, eye his crotch for even the least imperceptible movement, imagine devouring him. I was a peeping Tom and my subject was 2 feet from me. I had a very erotic couple of hours just staring at him, undressing him with my eyes, living in the wild, reckless abandon of the imagination Laura Nyro and her almost shamanistic implicitness conjured up. It was one of the most powerful sexual fantasies I have ever had. Kenny and I were in the same room together, and the freedom of being able to look at him and not be seen was perhaps, besides the moment of staring at my father naked under the covers as a little boy, my most powerful experience of pure, unabashed voyeurism. I even remember the corduroy pants he was wearing, the way the fabric defined every rumple and curve, every bulge of the terrain of his masculinity. I wanted to take his clothes off, ravish him, bury my face in him, eat him, drink him, do anything I wanted to him. Susan and Kenny both died of alcoholism, their beauty giving way to rootlessness and ravagement. Alcohol and drugs, the waving banner of the times. Sometimes we would all go out onto the lawn in front of the house, get drunk and high under the stars, and stare at the VFW across the street, talking and laughing, making up stories about everyone who passed, Laura Nyro singing inside wantonly. We called it Vinnie, Frank, and Willie's. Nowhere else in my life could I feel such camaraderie. This morning, I woke up with the song, You Don't Love Me When I Cry, moving mournfully through my head. There is a particular loneliness Laura Nyro addresses that plays somewhere in my heart like a solo muted trumpet, taps for everything that is gone.
It's clear that, there's a soundtrack for everything in your life. I mean, you write that way. And we're so used to hearing your thoughts come out in your music. Those of us who know your music, we feel we know you and we hear your thoughts. But I'm curious whether there was actually a soundtrack to writing the book or whether it was a kind of curiously silent part of your life.
Oh, I would say that in every time I mention music, it became the soundtrack. The whole Joni Mitchell chapter, the whole Stephen Sondheim chapter, the Laura Nyro chapter. It was the only way to write about music was to enter it. And as you know, there's a huge, long treatise on all the music I love, right? And that was thrilling to write. I mean, Jonathan Galassi just basically gave me one big green light, and he's just said, send me everything, and I would send him something every day, and he would call me, and like 8 minutes later, and my writing group wanted to murder me. I really have to say that they were like, editors don't do that. But it was just easy to pour myself into it. So the soundtrack of the book is written into the book.
And did you listen to that music as you were writing about it?
Yeah, there's even a moment where I'm writing about, I started thinking about this gorgeous piano piece by Robert Helps, an homage to Gabrielle Fauré, and I put it on. Or I was listening to the St. Matthew Passion when I wrote about Mahadich, and it's just all there. The Joni Mitchell, I have every album on my, phone, and yes, it's just the whole book is basically musicalized.
I mean, the music inspired so many words in this book, but I want to look at the inverse of that as well, which is when you work with a librettist, which you have, for example, in 27, you worked with Royce Favre,
yes,
who, and he was very young. I mean, when you worked with him now, of course, he's a great librettist of many operas, including Missy Mazzoli's The Listeners at Opera Philadelphia at the end of September, one of your dear friends. But I'm curious, what is the process for you of working with a librettist? Because you're so prolific in words and music. Is it a different kind of response? How do you approach that?
Yes. Well, I'll just say, I see Michael Corey, who I wrote Grapes of Wrath and Garden of the Fiends He Continues with. I'm not sure if Lynn Nottage is here, Mark Campbell, Royce. The truth is, each one of them is a very specific and different writer. And what happens to me is I truly enter the rhythm of how they speak. And I feel like what I'm doing is I'm installing their words inside of me, and I want to dress them in a way that makes them happy. I'm very unhappy if I vibe at all, because I usually call them at 7 in the morning and say, you have to come over today, I just finished something. I mean, and Michael lives around the block, so I've done it a million times. He's good. So if I even sense that they are not excited about what I did, I have to start over, because I know how much their words mean to them. Mm-hmm. And it has to mean that much to me. And I'm a storyteller, so it has to tell the story the way they told it, and then we tell it together. But I'm very inspired, and I feel like I only work with the best. I work with the best librettists because I'm picky about words.
Well, I mean, you take the world in so many extraordinary ways, and you tell this story about Shostakovich writing under the constraints of Stalin and how that influenced his music. Mm-hmm. And I'm curious if the world, in its current state in which we live, how that's influencing you and how that affects what you write and how that's changed in this modern strange time that we're in. And has it intensified? Has it become, have you blocked it out?
No, that's so good, Anthony. You're very good at this. No, the truth is I was just saying the other day that my greatest fear in the world, like some of us, is that Trump would be reelected. And if he were, I feel like I, as an artist, it would be like the artists during Weimar Germany, during Nazism, that you would have to it would sort of upgrade my sense of purpose and service and feel like I have to continue doing what I do, because it's like DeSantis taking all the funding away from the arts in Florida. It's not going to make anyone stop making art. Artists make art. And so if you're angry, sometimes that's the fuel. But I'm going to write no matter what happens. Do you know what I mean?
I love that. And I think you should read us your poem after saying that.
All right.
We need a little bit of that.
So, I'm just going to say this just in case there's a poet in the room. So, what I wanted to read it because I have not said anything about my mom and my mom was very important to me. My mom was a singer and comedian in the Borscht Belt. And I feel the reason I write music, and especially the reason I write for voices, is because her voice was the most beautiful voice I ever heard. Seriously. And so I wrote this. This was one of the poems I wrote during the quarantine. It's called Yahrzeit. And for those of you that don't know, when Jews light the candles on Friday night, the Yahrzeit, it's for the dead. Yahrzeit. My mother always kept a pile of sewing in the kitchen, darning late at night when she couldn't sleep. Sipping coffee, she'd mend worn socks, torn seams, holes in knees of pants that now you'd never keep. Sew, mama, sew, and thread the stitching through slow, so slow. Breathe, mama, sing, a song of mourning for what's long ago. My mother always kept a bag of worsted by the sofa, knitting afternoons when disquiet came. Clicking needles, she'd bring forth warm wool things, blankets, scarves, or hats from fine merino sheep. Knit, mama, knit, and pearl the yarn with your fears. Loop tears. Dream, mama, sing, a song of yearning for the passing years. She knit me once a poncho when ponchos were in style. The colors were effeminate. I wore it for a while, but only out the door. And once I got within a mile, I took it off, avoiding all the rancor it would rile. She knit herself a suit once, striped gold lame and cream, adorned the cuffs with rabbit fur. It fit her like a dream. She knit a teal blue jacket, sewed crystals on the seams. They clinked when she would dance and caught the light like laser beams. My mother kept a jar of coarse and kosher salt for cooking, pinching in a dash, enhancing every dish. In youth, Mama learned food comes hard-earned when her father dragged in spent from smoking fish. Cook, Mama, cook, imbue the stock with latent grief. Life's brief. Wish, Mama, sing, a song of sorrow for the falling leaf. Through busyness, my mother learned to keep at bay her crying. She vacuumed after she had pinned the laundry up for drying. She started every meal by cutting onions up for frying. For Jeffrey, she crocheted a throw for warmth when he was dying. Her loss is like an albatross and incomplete. What will I wear now? What will I eat? Thank you.
It's so beautiful. And the last thing I'll ask you, you say in the book that you see genuine beauty in what you've made and beauty out of the shards of glass that are your life. And I'm curious, as someone who also is working with Jonathan Galassi on a book and trying to write and think about it, at the end of this process, which tonight represents,
yes.
the book is now entering the world, it's now birthed. Was it a joyful process? Was it difficult? Was it sorrowful to revisit these things? Or was it just cathartic?
I would have to say it was mostly cathartic. It really was. Frank Bedard, when he wrote Ellen West, he said writing it was exorcism. This was exorcism for me. It really was. And I even say, I think, at the end of the book that a lot of things I moved past by writing about them. I am going to tell you this. The experiment was in the writing group is that I wanted to see how deeply I could allow myself to be known. Because remember, I didn't plan on publishing anything. I was so impressed with the writers who were in my group. I wanted to impress them, and I knew I couldn't impress them with my dazzling writing style. So I thought my honesty is what I have to offer. And I have never been so frank in my life. And I have to say, there's things no one has ever known that are in this book, and I'm proud of that. I'm scared about it. And I also feel like, wow, what is it going to be like to be so known?
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, at one point I even talk about, I'm just taking this off for a second, because I talk about wanting to wear the hat because I like wearing a hat and I enjoy the idiosyncrasy, but I don't want anyone to think I wear a hat because I'm ashamed of my head, even though I am.
You wouldn't want them to think that. But now we have a few minutes for questions. So think about whether you might have a question. We would love to take them, answer them. Yes.
I have a question about the cover. I think the cover is fabulous, and I'd like to know what you think of the cover and if you had any input in it.
I'm so glad you asked that because I have a friend named Megan Wilson, who I think is here tonight. Megan! Hi, Megan. Megan designs for Random House and Knopf, right, Megan? Yeah. So we had dinner, and Megan said, you have to ask for Na Kim. She's brilliant. So the next day I called Jonathan and I said, can I have Na Kim? And he said, she's a genius. Yes, you can have her. I have to tell you, I never met her. All I did was I sent her that photograph and I said, it's my favorite photograph anyone ever took of me. My friend Jim Wurzbach took it on the roof of our building on 70th Street. And I just liked that photo. And she never wrote to me. She never said anything. She just, one day that cover was there, I screamed. I think it's so brilliant. First of all, seeing through the bars, the fact that the only part of my body, my ear, is what you see when it's about opera. And I just think it's genius. I couldn't be happier. Also, I have to say this, I swear to God, I did not plan this outfit. I just like, Kevin, my husband sitting next to you, I just put these clothes on and then I came here and I was like, oh my God, I totally matched the book cover. I love it.
Questions? Yeah.
I love that you read that poem. I love that you read that poem about
Thanks,
your
Morgan.
mother, because I love the work that you do about your family. And I was thinking, the idea about death, but I always think that it's about resurrection and continuation of life.
Yes.
And that's what's so powerful about it. And I do have a question about sycamore trees.
Yes.
Is it continuing?
Oh my God, Morgan, I can't even believe you asked that because I really have to hope that Tommy Krasker isn't watching this tonight because I'm going to get in such trouble, but I have to tell you this. But he hasn't announced it yet. But he's announcing it this Friday, so it's not. All right. The sound designer at the Signature Theater, now Sycamore Trees is about my family. It premiered in 2010. The sound designer, whose name was Matthew Rowe, as a gift to me because he really liked the show, sent me the board recording. The board recording is when the sound designer, he tapes it from the board. And it was a board recording. It was good, and it was a fantastic record for me. But anyway, Tommy Krasker runs PS Classics Records, which is a label that has recorded a lot of my work. He heard the board recording, and one day he sent me one track from that, and he said, I have done a little work on this. And I was walking in Central Park, and I started to cry. It was so beautiful. It sounded like a recording studio. There is apparently whatever the new equipment is now. Oh my God, please, Tommy, he's gonna kill me if he's watching this, but I don't think he is. But so we're gonna have a cast recording of Sycamore Trees in September. He wants it to coordinate with this book coming out. And the cast was like Judy Kuhn, Diane Sutherland, who played my mother right there on the aisle, Tony Yazbek, Jessica Molaski, Farrah Alvin, Matthew Riesch, Mark Kudish. It was an incredible cast. Tina Landau directed it, so I'm very excited about it. Please, don't say anything about it. I know you'll all keep that a secret.
Great. Other questions?
Michael.
Who do you want to play the character of Ricky Gordon in the movie?
Question.
Anthony.
Oh, great. I'm ready.
I really do. I feel like someone like Anthony, someone with the, this is our first night doing anything together. We've never done anything together. I asked Anthony to do this with me. I knew he was writing a book for Jonathan, and I love his energy. Kevin and I went to see him stark naked in Akhenaten at the Met, and he was magnificent. And I don't know, I just had this instinct, I'm gonna ask Anthony to do this with me. And he said yes. But seriously, if he's the kind of person that someone who is, I know I can at least own, I hate so many things about myself, but I can own that I'm somewhat irrepressible. And he is too.
I think we share that. Yes, back there. Great.
Can you say a few things about how the title came about and what it means to you?
Would you say that again? I couldn't.
Can you say a few things about the title of the book and what it means to you?
Oh, yes. The reason it's called Seeing Through is because the epigraph of the book is by the great poet Brenda Hillman, and it's from a book of hers called Death Tractates. And that epigraph is, the job of the living is to be seen through. So seeing through felt right. It just was like, it's about myself being naked and transparent, and it's about hopefully you being naked and transparent. And then the subtitle was, I thought like I still have to sell a book or two. So I thought like sex, drugs, and opera. Who's not going to read this book? Christopher.
Hey, Ricky. I feel lucky to have worked on Morning Star and Grapes of Wrath with you, and I've seen this beautiful sort of evolution of you over the last decade or so. And I'm so excited to see what's coming next. And I think there's a lot of people in this room that there's an incredible love going towards you, but we've all been touched by what you've done, so thank you. So that's the first thing I wanted to say. Second question, I don't know if anybody else in this room did this. Once you got the PDF of the book, you went into the search to put your name to see if there was any bad things written about you. Yeah, I certainly did. I was happy that nothing happened. My question is there anything that was in the first draft that you wish was in the printed version that you removed?
Yes, because I had to cut so much of it, right? So for example, I had a huge chapter on foreign film. It was just called foreign film. It was like about Truffaut and Ozu and Mizoguchi, and it's like Rene, all the filmmakers I love. So I want to do something with that. But I folded some of that, Bergman, Antonioni, into the book. Some things I wish were still there, but the absolute truth is, like Jonathan said, you have to be a little nicer in that chapter. Sometimes I was very naughty. That thing, Bird by Bird, Annie Lamott, where she says, if you didn't want me to write bad things about you, you should have behaved better. Some people behave badly. I will tell you, I can say this, right, Michael? Like Michael Corey, we have been working together forever. And you know what? We love each other, and we have a very full, big relationship. It's in there, baby. Yes, so Christopher, that's the main thing. Also, Christopher, I have to say, and it's funny, I thought about you today. Christopher is like a Schulte award-winning conductor. And I thought, I wish I could have written about everyone I love 6 paragraphs about them. There's just, there's just so much, and especially when I had to cut half of it, believe me. Like your whole nude scene was in there, everything.
And tried something else. Did you question yourself? Did you question how was your confidence? Because I think a lot of people in life struggle with things like that, and they question themselves and maybe don't move on and try something else.
Okay, if all I do is question myself. I mean, Nicole, it is like one review is enough to make me want to flay myself alive. Do you know what I mean? I'm insecure about everything. However, I absolutely cannot not do what I do. As a matter of fact, I've said this, if you're a composer, a lot of times a critic will write about you as if there's another style you should be writing in. It happened a lot in the 20th century where composers that didn't write in a serial style, 12-tone, were really derided. And the question is, could someone actually change their style in that way? I only hear what I hear, and I can only do what I do. So you have to make peace with that. I couldn't make peace with it in the music theater because the music theater broke my heart. That's how I felt. And then in opera, I felt heard, you know. I wish the thing that was amazing about doing Intimate Apparel at the Lincoln Center Theater, we had like a month of previews, okay? In the opera world, you have 2 dress rehearsals and then you open. Grapes of Wrath, 2 dress rehearsals. It took 5 years to write. You want to kill yourself opening night. Like we were sitting at the dinner, you know, at Big Bank, and there's big dinner and everyone's eating and you're thinking like, I'm going to poop, like right now. And because you know that at 11:30 that night, it is going to be like either great or it's over. You know what I mean? And it's The Grapes of Wrath, the world's favorite book. This could really go badly. You know? So I have plenty of insecurity, but like Anthony, I'm irrepressible. I have to keep going. And I love, there is one thing I say in my book that I just want to say this, that I couldn't believe I actually wrote this. There's many things that, as I say, that I don't like about myself. You know what? I like my music. I think it's beautiful. I really do. And I do believe in God. I believe in co-creation. I believe when Stravinsky said, I am the vessel through which passed La Sacra, I believe something happens and it comes through me and I'm happy to be that vessel. And I think it's beautiful.
You want to do it one more time?
Yeah. Okay. We're going to end with the song again. We just thought that would be nice. But I better have the music.
You bet. Yeah, that's good. Thank you all for coming, and thank you to Ricky. He's going to be signing books after, so if you have your copy, if you don't, please get one. And yes, this song feels particularly appropriate to repeat.
I loved that idea. It was Melanie, who runs the center, that said, do it at the beginning and the end, and we liked that idea.
You like it?
And I'll fix a couple of the wrong notes I played.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll sing a few more.
No, you didn't sing any. Oh, sorry, wait.
Did you get it?
Is my pedal working? Okay, I have to go. I'm sorry, I have to do this reboot.
Yeah, that's good. And you know, while you're doing that, you
What?
reminded me of something my teacher always says about critics.
Tell me.
Critics are like, and I felt it was appropriate for this book, critics are like virgins telling whores how to make love.
Oh, that's very good.
So if you ever feel caught in any moment, remember that.
I will, because there's probably a few more reviews of this book coming out.
Exactly.
All right.
Just a rainy day or two in a windy tower. That was all I had of you, saving half an hour, marred by greeting passing groups in a cinder walk near some naked blackberry hoops dim with purple chalk.
Just a rainy day or two in a windy tower. That was all I asked of you, saving half an hour.
Thank you. You did so good. Thank you very much. Thank you. What do we do now?
We just go.
Okay,
we go
good.
sign.
Okay. Okay.